In civil procedure, what is personal jurisdiction? Well, remember, in order for a civil court to have the authority to hear and decide a case before it, the court needs three things. Number one, the civil court needs subject matter jurisdiction over the particular type of case that's being heard, personal jurisdiction over the defendant, and finally, the court needs venue in the proper judicial district. Now, if any of these three things are missing, then that court is not going to have the authority to hear and decide the case before it, which means if the plaintiff wishes to pursue their cause of action, that case is going to have to be moved to a court that does have all three of these things. Again, subject matter jurisdiction over the particular type of case that's being heard, personal jurisdiction over the defendant, and venue in the proper judicial district. Now, of course, in today's video, we just want to focus on number two, personal jurisdiction. So what is personal jurisdiction? Personal jurisdiction simply says that in order for a court to have the authority to adjudicate the rights and liabilities of a defendant, the defendant must have minimum contact with the state in which the action is being brought, which we call the forum state. Okay, so how do we break this down? I'll give you guys an easy example here to illustrate personal jurisdiction. Let's say that I have never been to the state of Alaska in my entire life. This is completely true. I don't know anybody in the state of Alaska. I've never been there. I don't own any property in Alaska. I literally have zero contact with the state of Alaska in my entire life. I have never had any contact with Alaska. I've never made a phone call that's gone to Alaska. I've never talked to anyone in Alaska. Literally zero contact with the state of Alaska in my entire life. So what does that mean in terms of personal jurisdiction? Well, that means that I cannot be sued in an Alaska court. As a defendant, I cannot be hailed into Alaska. I have had no contact with the state of Alaska in my entire life, which means an Alaska court cannot have personal jurisdiction over me. They do not have the authority to adjudicate my rights and liabilities as a defendant. It doesn't matter if the plaintiff lives in Alaska and the plaintiff has had a ton of contact with the state of Alaska. He can't sue me in a place where I have had no contact. That is why we have personal jurisdiction. It's mainly there to prevent plaintiffs from being able to sue defendants anywhere they want. Because imagine what would happen if there was no personal jurisdiction, right? You could, if you were a plaintiff and you were savvy, you would just look at every state's laws and say, for whatever action you were suing for, and say, what state has the most plaintiff-friendly laws? That's where I'm going to select. That's where I'm going to choose to sue a defendant. It's called forum shopping, right? You just go and you look at forums and you sue the defendant wherever you think it's going to be most beneficial to you. That's obviously not an efficient result. We don't want that. So we have personal jurisdiction, which says that if you're going to sue a defendant somewhere, that defendant has to have some level of contact with the forum state. Now we call this minimum contacts. This idea of contact we call minimum contacts. And this is the key with a personal jurisdiction analysis. And this is what the focus of your personal jurisdiction analysis is always going to be on. What is the threshold? What is the level of contact, right, with the forum state, where now we're going to say, okay, the defendant now has enough contact with the forum state that that court is going to have the authority to adjudicate his rights and liabilities. What is that threshold requirement? What if, for example, I had been on a vacation to Alaska. Now I have had some contact with Alaska. Is that enough for me to be hailed into court there? What if I was ice fishing in Alaska and I'm served with notice and process of a lawsuit while I'm in Alaska ice fishing? Is that enough contact where now I can be hailed into an Alaska court? You know, and obviously, what if I'm domiciled? What if I live in Alaska? Is that enough contact? What is that level? What is the threshold that's going to be required where now I am going to be able to be hailed into that Alaska court? What is going to give Alaska, what contact do I have to have with Alaska where now they're going to have the authority to adjudicate my rights and liabilities? That is what your whole personal jurisdiction analysis is going to focus on. And remember, the key here to remember in a personal jurisdiction analysis, and what we'll end this video with, is personal jurisdiction is revolving around the defendant. the defendant. I see this confused oftentimes. You never want to, I won't say never, right? But generally, you don't want to ever be focusing on a plaintiff in a personal jurisdiction analysis. A plaintiff gets to choose wherever he wants to file a lawsuit. The defendant is the one who we're going to be focusing on primarily in a personal jurisdiction analysis. Remember, the definition of personal jurisdiction is all about whether the court has the authority to adjudicate the rights and liabilities of the defendant. It's not about the plaintiff. So I'll leave it at that. In the next few videos, we'll start to break this down and really discuss minimum contacts. What is that level? What's the threshold requirement that's now going to be enough contact with the forum state where we can say, okay, the defendant has now had enough contact with this forum. He can be hailed into court there. That's what we're going to be discussing in our next few videos. But until then, guys, I'll leave you to it, and I'll see you at our next video.